asked when the wedding was, and my daughter-in-law said, "We got married yesterday." Those words hit me like a punch I never saw coming. My heart stalled for a moment, stupidly, desperately wanting to believe she was joking. But no, the look in her eyes was too serious, too steady. That night, everything I thought I knew about my family cracked open, spilling secrets and pain I wasn't ready to face. My name is Olivia, and I'm 52 years old. I live in a quiet suburb where the trees bloom in spring and the neighbors know my face, but not my story. I'm a mother, a widow, and until that moment, I believed I had some control over the chaos life threw my way. I raised Caleb, my only son, on my own after his father died when he was just 10. Mark was a good man, but his sudden death left us stranded in grief, trying to rebuild from ashes that still smoldered. I worked long hours as a nurse to keep us afloat, and Caleb grew up strong, kind, and full of hope I clung to when I almost lost my own faith. So when Caleb told me he was engaged, I was over the moon. I wanted nothing more than to see him happy, to watch him start a family of his own to heal the wounds we'd carried for years. But hearing those words, "We got married yesterday" from his wife Rachel, was the start of a nightmare I never imagined. I wasn't invited. There was no ceremony, no gathering, no announcement. Just a quiet, sudden merging of lives like a secret stitched beneath the surface of our fragile peace. It felt like a betrayal, like my son had slipped away into shadows I couldn't reach. I remember the moment I realized how little I truly knew about Rachel. She was quiet, distant, and guarded. Her smiles felt practiced, like masks hiding deeper storms. Caleb was head over heels, blind to the cracks, or maybe choosing to ignore them. But I saw the way Rachel looked at me sometimes, sharp, almost unreadable, and I began to suspect that beneath her calm exterior, there was a plan, a secret. The days that followed the wedding were filled with tension. Conversations stopped short. Caleb seemed torn between his love for Rachel and the strange silence growing between us. I tried to hold on to hope, to believe that maybe this was just a rough patch. But the truth started to seep out in fragments, whispers of a past. Rachel refused to share a shadow hanging over her family, and then finally a secret that shattered everything. One evening, Caleb called me, voice cracking. He told me that Rachel had lied to him about who she was, about where she came from, about her family, and more painfully, that she was connected to a man from his past, someone he thought he'd left behind forever. The man was his half-brother, the son of Mark, my late husband, from a secret affair I never knew about. I felt the ground fall away beneath me. All those years of grief, of trying to hold our family together, suddenly made no sense. Mark had a life I never knew. A betrayal that reached into the present, tangled with the person Rachel really was. Caleb's marriage wasn't just a surprise. It was a collision of past sins and hidden wounds that threatened to consume us all. The pain was raw and immediate. I felt rage at Mark for his lies at Rachel, for her deception at myself, for never seeing the signs. But beneath it all was a crushing grief for the family we lost, the one we thought we had, the one that might never be whole again. As the truth unfolded, I realized that this was more than a family drama. It was karma in motion, a reckoning for secrets buried too deep. The emotional wounds we carried weren't just old scars, they were living, breathing ghosts, haunting every step we took. And so I began to unravel a story I wasn't sure I wanted to know, chasing answers through betrayal, pain, and a tangled web of lies. I had to understand how we got here and whether there was any way to find peace on the other side. Every night after Caleb left the house, I'd sit alone in the dim light of our living room, trying to piece together what felt like a shattered puzzle with missing parts. The silence around me was deafening, louder than any argument or confrontation could have been. My mind raced back to Mark, my husband, my Caleb's father, the man I thought I knew. The man who had built this family with me. And now the man who had kept a secret so deep, it poisoned the very foundation we stood on. I remembered the day Mark passed, how everything after that felt like a slow-motion collapse. Raising Caleb alone was a mountain I climbed one painful step at a time, but at least I thought we were safe from more storms. Now, I wasn't sure if any of it had been real. Was Mark the man I loved? Or just a carefully crafted illusion? Had the years been a lie? The revelation about Mark's affair and the half-brother I never knew existed felt like a knife twisting inside me. How could he have hidden this from me, from Caleb? And more importantly, why? Was it shame, fear? Or did he think the truth would destroy us? Caleb and Rachel's marriage rushed, and secretive suddenly made sense in a terrifying way. Rachel wasn't just an outsider. She was part of a tangled family history I'd been blind to. And the fact that Caleb had married her without telling me, it was as if he was trying to shield me from more pain, or maybe keep me from tearing them apart. But in doing so, he had only drawn me deeper into a web I didn't know how to escape. I reached out to Caleb, desperate to understand what he was feeling. His voice was heavy with confusion and guilt. He confessed that Rachel had begged him to keep their past a secret, fearing judgment and rejection. She had grown up carrying wounds I couldn't begin to imagine, and the fear of exposing those wounds was paralyzing. Yet their silence was a poison that seeped into every corner of my life. I felt isolated, betrayed not just by Mark and Rachel, but by Caleb too. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to break free from the suffocating weight of all these secrets. But I also knew that anger wouldn't heal us. It wouldn't bring back the years we lost, or mend the fractures that had opened so wide. So I did what I always do when life gets too heavy. I searched for truth. I found myself digging into the past, speaking with old friends of Mark's people who remembered a different side of him. What I learned was heartbreaking. Mark's affair had been with a woman struggling with her own demons, and the child they had, Caleb's half-brother, was a boy who had grown up without the father he deserved. The family had been fractured long before Rachel entered the picture. The more I uncovered, the more I realized this wasn't just about betrayal or revenge. It was about wounds so deep they echoed through generations, leaving pain in their wake like an unhealed scar. And Rachel. She was both a victim and a player in this tangled story, trying to find her place in a family that had never fully accepted her. In the weeks that followed, I confronted Rachel. Our conversation was tense, filled with unspoken grief and anger. She confessed her fears, her loneliness, and the burden of carrying a legacy she never asked for. We weren't enemies, we were broken, women tied together by the same invisible threads of betrayal and hope. As we talked, I felt a strange kinship growing between us. Forgiveness felt far away, but understanding was a fragile bridge we could start to build. Then one evening, Caleb came to me with news that shook me to my core. Rachel was pregnant. The child growing inside her was not just a symbol of new life, but a beacon of hope and a test for all of us. Could we find a way to heal before this new chapter began? Or would the weight of our past crush us before we had the chance? That night, I stared at the ceiling, tears streaming down my face, wondering if I could forgive the sins of the past and embrace a future I never imagined. Because in the end, family isn't about perfection. It's about surviving the storms, facing the darkness, and finding light, even when it feels impossible. The news of Rachel's pregnancy was a shock that resonated deep within me, reverberating through every thought, every decision I'd ever made about family loyalty and love. The child was not just a new life, a new beginning for Caleb and Rachel. It was a reminder that life, with all its messy, unpredictable twists, always moves forward. The past had a way of catching up with you, but the future, no matter how complicated or painful, had a way of pushing you forward whether you were ready or not. I spent days oscillating between rage and guilt. Rage that Rachel and Caleb had been so secretive, and guilt because I wondered if my anger had driven them to hide things from me. I thought about the woman Rachel had been before all this, the woman who walked into my life with an innocent smile, a gentle hand, and a quiet promise of love for my son. How had I missed the cracks? How had I missed the hidden pain in her eyes? Had she been so broken by the past that she couldn't see how much she was hurting me and Caleb by keeping this truth buried? And then I thought about Mark, the man I'd once trusted so completely. How many secrets had he carried that I never knew? How many parts of his life had I never understood? I wanted answers. But what good would they do me now? What was left of the family I thought I had? The truth had turned everything I thought I knew into a hollow shell. But there was also the child growing inside Rachel, my grandchild. And as much as I wanted to ignore it, I knew this baby represented a chance. A chance for healing, for reconciliation, for rebuilding the broken pieces of our family. I had to make a choice. Would I let the bitterness of the past destroy my connection with this child? Or would I find the strength to open my heart again? I called Caleb that afternoon, and my voice trembled as I spoke to him. I want to meet her, I said. It wasn't easy to admit. I had spent so many nights in anger, wondering if I could ever forgive Rachel. But in that moment, I knew something had to change. We had to start somewhere. If Caleb and Rachel were going to be parents, if this child was going to be a part of our family, then I had to face the pain, confront the betrayal, and find a way to move forward. The meeting was awkward, to say the least. Caleb stood beside Rachel, both of them nervous, unsure of how to navigate this new chapter we were all about to step into. Rachel was visibly pregnant now, her once pristine complexion slightly flushed with the weight of her condition. She looked so young, so vulnerable. And in that moment, I saw her not as the woman who had kept so many secrets, but as a young girl carrying the weight of a past she didn't ask for. I understood that even if I couldn't yet forgive her, I could no longer see her as an adversary. We were both survivors, both carrying our wounds in different ways. I took a deep breath as I looked at them both, my son and his wife. I don't know if I can ever fully forgive what's happened, I said softly. But I want to try. For you, for this child, for the family we used to be. Caleb nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I don't know what to do either, Mom. I'm so sorry for keeping this from you. I didn't want to hurt you. And in that moment, I saw it, the raw honesty in his face, the regret that matched my own. I realized then that this wasn't just about Rachel or Mark or the lies. It was about us, the family left behind in the wreckage. We were all just trying to survive, trying to find a way to pick up the broken pieces. It wasn't going to be easy. There was no magical moment of healing, no sudden forgiveness that made everything okay. But in the days that followed, I began to open up to Rachel, to hear her side of the story. She talked about her own pain growing up without a stable family, without love, without knowing who she really was. She explained the fear she'd carried for years, the fear that this secret would destroy everything she had built. I learned that Rachel wasn't just hiding the truth for herself. She was protecting Caleb, protecting the future she believed in. But there were other things she needed to understand. The hurt she had caused wasn't something we could just sweep under the rug. The damage to our trust, the way the lies had eaten away at our relationship, it was real. But so was the possibility of something new. Maybe not a perfect family, but one that could heal and grow. I spent more time with Rachel getting to know the woman behind the secrets behind the pain. I didn't always understand her choices, but I began to understand her as a person, someone who had been broken and was now trying to put herself back together. The more I learned about her, the more I realized that this wasn't just about forgiveness, it was about healing. The kind of healing that doesn't happen overnight, but that takes time, patience, and an open heart. One evening, as I sat with Caleb and Rachel at the kitchen table, we talked about the future. We spoke about the child who would soon enter our lives, the way we would navigate this new family dynamic. We didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in a long time, we were really talking about what we wanted for the future. And in that conversation, I realized something crucial. Family isn't just made of blood. It's made of choices. Choices to stay, to fight, to heal, to forgive. And maybe, just maybe, we had a chance at all of that. The days stretched into weeks, and the weight of everything we were navigating, guilt, hurt, uncertainty, seemed to lift just slightly like a storm cloud, finally letting in a flicker of sunlight. I'd been through a lot in my life, but this felt different. It felt like I was learning how to live all over again, how to find peace in the aftermath of devastation. And I knew it wasn't just about me. It was about Caleb. It was about Rachel. And it was about the life growing inside her. There were moments when I'd catch myself staring at Rachel, still wondering if I could ever truly trust her, if we could ever fully heal from the secrets and lies. But then, there were moments when she'd look at me, her eyes softening, a quiet understanding between us. She wasn't perfect, neither was I. But we were both doing our best, and that meant something. Maybe that was all we could ask for, just trying one day at a time. Caleb had changed too. The guilt that weighed on him after everything he'd hidden from me was starting to fade, replaced by something softer, a vulnerability he'd never shown before. It was as if, in his pursuit of love and the future, he had forgotten the importance of transparency and honesty, lessons I had tried so hard to teach him. But now, he was learning in the hardest way possible that secrets have a cost, that the truth always finds its way to the surface, and that no one is immune to the ripples of their past. One evening, Rachel and I were sitting in the kitchen sipping tea and talking about nothing in particular when she dropped a bombshell. The words left her lips so quietly, so simply, that for a moment I thought I had imagined them. "I think I might have known about Caleb's half-brother before I married him," she said, staring down at her mug, her voice barely above a whisper. I froze, the air suddenly thick with unspoken history. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to steady my breath. Rachel looked at me, her face pale. I didn't know the full details, but I knew. I was connected to that family, the one Caleb never knew about. I found out a few months before we started dating, and She trailed off her words, choking her. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to lose him. I blinked, struggling to comprehend. "You knew, and you didn't tell him." I didn't know how she said quietly. I didn't want to hurt him. I didn't want to be the reason he'd question everything, especially when I knew how much he loved you. She paused, her eyes searching mine as if hoping for some kind of understanding. But I wasn't just trying to protect him, Olivia. I was protecting myself too. I was afraid that if he found out, he'd see me differently. And just like that, another layer of the truth was peeled back. Rachel's own insecurities, her own fears, her own vulnerability. It wasn't just about keeping secrets from me. It was about protecting herself, protecting her place in the family. And the more I listened, the more I realized how much we had in common. She wasn't some outsider. I wasn't the only one in this family who had been broken by past wounds. Still, I couldn't ignore the sting. The fact that she'd kept something so important from Caleb, it felt like another betrayal. But the more I thought about it, the more I understood why she did it. She had never truly been a part of a family before. She had never known what it meant to be loved unconditionally, without strings attached. The fear of rejection, of being cast aside, was something I could relate to. I'd seen it in myself after losing Mark. The idea that I could be so easily forgotten, so easily discarded, was a terror I understood all too well. But this revelation, it didn't make things simpler. In some ways, it made them more complicated. Caleb's life was built on lies that he had never asked for, lies that weren't his to carry. His marriage to Rachel, as complicated and twisted as it had become, was now tangled in even more layers of deception. Could I really forgive her? Could I accept that Rachel had been hiding things from both Caleb and me, even if it was out of fear? The truth was that I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know if we could ever return to the way things were before all the Christmas dinners, the shared laughter, the joy we had once found in each other. The weight of betrayal, the lies that had been passed down like a toxic inheritance, might be too heavy to ever truly put down. But I also knew that if I didn't try to forgive, I'd lose everything. I'd lose Caleb. I'd lose Rachel. I'd lose the chance to rebuild, even in the smallest way, what had been torn apart. This wasn't just about them. It was about me too. It was about taking control of my own pain, my own grief, and finding a way to heal in a world that had so often seemed like it was against me. So I took a step. I took Rachel's hand, something I never thought I would do, after all the hurt, after all the betrayal. It was a gesture, small but powerful, that felt like a choice. A choice to move forward, to stop clinging to the past, and to embrace whatever future we could make together. I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you, Rachel, I said quietly, my voice trembling. But I'm willing to try. For Caleb, for the baby. Rachel nodded, her eyes filling with tears. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right, Olivia. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't know how to fix everything. In that moment, I saw the real Rachel for the first time, not the woman hiding behind secrets, not the daughter-in-law who had betrayed me, but a woman who had been broken just like me. And maybe that was the first step in healing. To stop seeing each other as the enemy, to start seeing the broken pieces of ourselves reflected in each other. The road ahead would be difficult. I knew that. But I also knew that we had a chance to heal, a chance to rebuild, and that no matter how painful it was something worth fighting for. The days after Rachel's birth felt like a surreal blur. There were moments when everything seemed calm, almost peaceful. And then there were moments when the weight of everything that had happened, everything that was still left unsaid, came crashing down on me again. But for Caleb, the birth of his son was a turning point. A new purpose, a new reason to wake up every morning, and a new way to make things right. It was almost as if the baby had transformed him, given him a chance to rebuild his broken parts, the parts that had been shattered by the lies, the guilt, and the weight of the past. I watched him more closely now, seeing him in a new light. He was no longer the angry, resentful young man who'd been so blinded by love and pride that he'd turned away from his family. In a way, I had to admit the baby had saved him. It had given him a reason to put everything aside, the regrets, the broken relationships, the deep gnawing feeling that he'd failed. And there was something beautiful about that. Watching him try to be the father he never had, the father he had always wanted to be. But as time passed, it became clear that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The baby was the symbol of everything new, but it also carried the weight of all the old betrayals, all the unresolved wounds we hadn't yet healed. I could see Rachel trying so hard to fit into this family that was still so fractured. But sometimes, no matter how hard you try, you can't force something to be what it's not. There were still moments when she'd pull away, moments when the awkward silences between us would stretch out far too long, as if the air between us was too thick to breathe. One evening, I found myself sitting with Rachel in the living room, the baby asleep in his crib. Caleb was out running errands, and it was just the two of us. She was holding her cup of tea, her fingers curled around it tightly, almost as if she was trying to hold on to something that kept slipping away. There was an unspoken tension between us, a distance that neither of us knew how to close. "I've been thinking about what you said," Rachel finally spoke, breaking the silence. "About trying. I know I've made a mess of things, and I can't change what happened. But I want to try. I want to be a part of this family, Olivia. I don't want to be the person who tore everything apart." I looked at her, seeing the desperation in her eyes, the raw vulnerability she tried so hard to hide. "Rachel, it's not about what you want. It's about what you've done. You can't just erase everything. You can't just undo the hurt and the lies. I can't even trust you yet, not fully. And that's not something I can fix overnight." She nodded, the corners of her mouth turning down. "I know. I'm not asking you to forgive me right now. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. For all of it." The honesty in her words struck me harder than I expected. It wasn't enough to erase everything, but it was something real, something that showed that she was at least aware of the damage she'd caused. And that in some strange way was a small step forward. As I sat there, I couldn't help but wonder if I was being too harsh, if I was holding on to the past too tightly, if I was letting the wounds define me instead of the person I was becoming. But I also knew that forgiveness didn't come easily. Trust didn't come easily. And what had happened to my family, what had happened to me, wasn't something I could just forget, no matter how much I wanted to. But in that moment, with Rachel sitting across from me, her hands trembling as she spoke, I realized something. I realized that we were both survivors. We had both been broken by circumstances beyond our control. And maybe, just maybe, that was where we could begin to find common ground. Not in the need for forgiveness, but in the understanding that we were both trying to heal from the same pain. "I'm not sure what the future holds, Rachel," I said softly. "But if you're truly committed to being a part of this family, then I'm willing to try. I'm willing to take it one day at a time." She looked at me, her eyes filling with tears, but she didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. We both knew that this wasn't the end of the road, not by a long shot. There were still so many things unsaid, so many emotions that hadn't been fully processed. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like there was a possibility, just a small possibility, that we could make it through this. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I found myself thinking about my life before all of this, before the secrets, the betrayal, the pain. I remembered a time when I believed in the idea of family, the comfort of knowing that no matter what happened, there was always someone there for you. I'd thought that I would never experience that kind of betrayal, never have to face the possibility that the people I loved could hurt me in ways I never imagined. But life, as I had come to learn, doesn't play by the rules. People make mistakes, and sometimes they make mistakes that cost us everything. And sometimes, just when we think we've lost it all, something unexpected happens, a new life, a new beginning, and we are given a chance to rebuild. The next few months were filled with ups and downs. There were moments when Caleb and I would talk about the future, about raising his son, about the kind of family we wanted to be. There were moments when Rachel and I would have long conversations about what it meant to be a part of this family and what we each needed to feel like we belonged. And there were moments, too, when I felt that old, familiar ache, that longing for the family I once had before everything was broken. But through it all, I learned something about myself, that healing isn't linear. It doesn't happen all at once, and it doesn't happen in a straight line. It's messy, complicated, and full of setbacks. But it is possible. And sometimes, you have to accept the broken pieces of your past in order to move forward and build something new. And so, as I stood there in the hospital room holding Caleb's son, I knew one thing for sure. This was my family. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what I had imagined, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to embrace it. As the weeks rolled on, I began to realize just how much I had changed. The constant undercurrent of resentment, the desire for revenge, had started to fade. It wasn't that I had forgiven Mark, or Rachel, or even myself. No, that wasn't it. It was more like I had begun to accept that holding on to that anger wasn't going to fix anything. It wasn't going to bring Mark back or undo the hurt. It was just a weight I didn't need to carry anymore. Caleb was adjusting to fatherhood, but it wasn't easy. I could see the strain in his eyes, the constant battle between wanting to be everything for his son and feeling like he was barely holding it together. He had always been the kind of person who kept things close to the chest, but now as he navigated the complicated waters of parenthood, I could see him struggling to keep up the facade. His relationship with Rachel was still rocky. There were times when they would fight in hushed tones in the kitchen, and I'd feel that familiar tension fill the air. But then there were the moments when he'd look at his son, and I could see the raw, unfiltered love in his eyes. And for a brief moment, everything seemed right. Rachel was trying too. For all her mistakes, for all the missteps, she truly did want to make this work. I could see it in the way she looked at Caleb, the way she reached out for his hand when he came home after a long day. She was terrified, too terrified of failing, terrified of losing him, terrified of never being good enough. I knew the feeling all too well. I knew what it was like to feel like you were always standing on the edge of something you couldn't quite grasp. But what struck me the most during those weeks was how much I had been neglecting myself in the midst of everything. In trying to fix Caleb, in trying to fix Rachel, in trying to piece together the broken parts of my family, I had forgotten that I needed to heal too. I needed to allow myself the space to grieve, to feel the weight of my own pain, and to give myself permission to move on from it. There was a day, one quiet afternoon, when I found myself standing in front of the old family photo album. It had been months since I had even thought to open it, but as I ran my fingers over the worn cover, memories flooded back. There were pictures of Mark and me young in love, so full of hope. Pictures of Caleb as a little boy with his big eyes and messy hair. We were a family then, whole and perfect, in a way that felt impossible now. But as I flipped through the pages, I felt something stir inside me, a sense of finality. I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't the woman who thought that love could fix everything. I wasn't the woman who believed that family was untouchable. I had learned that love wasn't always enough, that trust could be broken in an instant, and that sometimes the people closest to you were the ones who hurt you the most. But I also learned that you couldn't let that define you. You couldn't let that pain become the thing that ruled your life. I closed the album, my heart heavy, but for the first time in months, I didn't feel crushed by it. I didn't feel like I was drowning in memories. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something new, something I had to figure out on my own. It was terrifying and liberating all at once. It was then that I decided I needed to step back. Not from Caleb or Rachel, not from the baby, but from the constant role I had been playing as the caretaker of everyone's feelings. I needed to give myself space to breathe, to rediscover who I was, without all the labels, without the expectations. For the first time in years, I needed to be selfish. I started spending more time doing things that brought me peace, reading, walking in the park, taking long drives just to clear my mind. I started going to therapy again, a decision that had been long overdue. I couldn't change the past, and I couldn't undo what had been done, but I could change how I responded to it. I could change how I moved forward. And as I started to find myself again, I saw the changes in Caleb too. I watched him grow into the father he wanted to be. Steadier, more focused. I saw him learn to put the baby first, even when everything else felt uncertain. I knew that he was still struggling, still wrestling with the ghosts of his past, but there was a shift in him, a willingness to let go of the anger, a desire to build something new for his son, something better than what he'd been given. And then there was Rachel. Our relationship, though still fragile, began to evolve. She wasn't perfect, none of us were, but I could see the efforts she was making to be better, to be a part of this family. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wasn't demanding anything from me. She was simply trying, and I could respect that. One evening, when the baby was asleep and Caleb was out grabbing dinner, Rachel and I sat together in the living room, the silence between us more comfortable than it had ever been. I could feel the change in the air, that strange sense of things settling into place, even if the puzzle was still incomplete. "I don't know what the future holds," Rachel said quietly, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her sweater. "But I know I want to be here. For you, for Caleb, for the baby. I know it's not going to be easy, and I know I've made mistakes, but I hope we can find a way to be a family, even if it looks nothing like what we thought it would." I didn't know how to respond at first. I didn't have any grand words of wisdom, but then I realized something. I realized that sometimes the only thing you can offer is the willingness to try. The willingness to open yourself up to the possibility that things can change, that healing can happen even in the most unlikely of places. "I don't know what the future holds either," I said softly, my voice steady but full of emotion. "But I'm willing to try too," and that was it. The first real step forward. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was real. It was honest. The road ahead was still long. There were still scars, still unresolved issues, still things I didn't know how to face. But I had learned that life wasn't about erasing the past. It was about accepting it, learning from it, and finding a way to move forward one small step at a time. As I looked at the family around me, Caleb, Rachel, the baby, and even myself, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time: hope. The kind of hope that doesn't promise perfection, but the kind that promises that no matter how broken you feel, no matter how much pain you carry, there is always a chance for healing, for growth, for change. And in the end, maybe that was the greatest lesson I could take from all of this. I had always thought that the scars of betrayal would define me forever, that I would carry the weight of my pain, my anger, my losses for the rest of my life. I thought that I would never truly heal, that the wounds would remain open forever, oozing with resentment and regret. But here, in this quiet space that I had carved out for myself, away from the demands of trying to fix everyone else, away from the ghosts of the past, I began to understand something profound. Healing isn't linear. It doesn't happen all at once, and it doesn't come in a neat, orderly package. Healing is messy. It's a tangled web of good days and bad days of setbacks, and progress of moments where you feel like you're drowning, and moments where you feel like you're finally starting to breathe again. In the months that followed, I found myself leaning into that mess. I stopped trying to make sense of everything and simply allowed myself to experience it without the need for answers, without the pressure to resolve every conflict or untangle every lie. I allowed myself the space to be human, to feel deeply without apology, and to move at my own pace. I still had moments where the past would hit me like a wave crashing over me, threatening to pull me under. There were days when the anger would flare up, especially when I thought about Mark, how he had betrayed me, how he had taken our love and twisted it into something unrecognizable. There were nights when I'd lie awake wondering if I could ever fully trust anyone again. The shadows of those betrayals would loom, but I realized that they didn't have to control me. I didn't have to live my life in constant fear of them waiting for the other shoe to drop. But there were also days like when I was holding my nephew in my arms, or when I watched Caleb's eyes soften as he looked at his son, when I realized just how far we had all come. I could see the changes in Caleb. He was no longer the angry, distant man he had been when we first reunited. He had found a kind of peace, not perfection, but a steady commitment to doing the best he could for his son, for Rachel, for me. His actions spoke louder than his words ever could. He was trying every day to be better. And though there were still moments of tension between us, there was a new understanding, a shared responsibility for the family we were trying to rebuild. I watched Rachel too. She was still trying to prove herself to earn the place in this family that she had once taken for granted. There were moments when she'd make me feel like we had nothing in common, like we were both living in different worlds, separated by the choices we had made. But I saw the change in her, the quiet shift that came from years of regret and self-doubt. She wasn't perfect, none of us were, but she was trying, and that I had to admit was worth something. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened. It was about learning how to live with it, how to make space for growth. And through all of this, I found a deeper sense of clarity about my own journey. I had spent so much time in the past trying to fix things that could never be fixed, trying to make sense of pain that wasn't meant to make sense. I had let guilt, shame, and anger shape who I thought I was. But now, I was finally learning that I didn't have to let those things define me anymore. I was allowed to let go. I was allowed to choose my own path, even if that path was unclear, even if it led me somewhere I didn't expect. It wasn't until one quiet evening, while I was sitting alone in the kitchen watching the sun set through the window, that I realized just how far I had come. The house was quiet. Caleb and Rachel had taken the baby out for a walk, leaving me with my thoughts. And as I sat there, I thought about everything that had happened, the betrayals, the tears, the moments of rage, and the quiet moments of peace we were now starting to find. And I felt something shift inside me. I realized that forgiveness wasn't something I needed to give to anyone else. It wasn't about forgiving Mark for his betrayal or Rachel for her role in all of it. It was about forgiving myself. It was about letting go of the weight I had been carrying for so long, the burden of guilt, regret, and anger that had been eating away at me. I wasn't responsible for everything that had happened. I couldn't control the choices others made, but I could control how I responded to them. And I could choose to move forward. I could choose to stop punishing myself for things that were beyond my control. And so I did. I forgave myself in the quietest, most profound way. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't an aha moment. But as I sat there in the stillness of that evening, I felt a sense of release, a lightness that I hadn't felt in years. I had spent so much time trying to heal everyone around me that I had forgotten to heal myself. But now I knew that healing wasn't just about the people I loved. It was about me too. It was about taking care of my own heart, my own spirit, and giving myself the space to grow. The next few months felt like a slow, steady rhythm of life. A rhythm that wasn't perfect, but was undeniably real. Caleb and I started to find more balance in our relationship. There were still bumps in the road, but we had learned how to navigate them with more patience, more understanding. Rachel, too, found her place in the family. It wasn't always easy, but we were building something new, something that, while still imperfect, felt like it had the potential to endure. And then there was the baby. As he grew, I found myself falling more and more in love with him, with the hope he represented. There was something about his innocent laughter, his tiny hands, and the way he looked at the world with such wide-eyed wonder that made everything feel worth it. For all the pain, for all the heartbreak, for all the years spent trying to fix things that couldn't be fixed, he was the reminder that new beginnings were always possible, that love, even after everything, still had the power to heal. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, not by any means. There were still hard days, still moments when the past crept back into my thoughts, reminding me of what I had lost. But I had learned that it wasn't about erasing those moments. It was about moving forward in spite of them. About choosing to live in the present, even when the past still lingered like a shadow. I had come to understand that family wasn't perfect, and neither were we. But in our imperfection, in our brokenness, we had found a way to heal, a way to build something new. And that was enough. As I watched Caleb and Rachel with the baby one evening, their laughter echoing through the house, I realized something that I would carry with me for the rest of my life. We all have scars. We all have wounds, some visible and some hidden deep inside us. But those scars don't have to define us. We can choose to heal. We can choose to move forward. And in doing so, we give ourselves the chance to create something beautiful, something that might not be perfect, but that is real, and that is enough. Thank you for following along with my story. If you found any part of it relatable, or if it's made you reflect on your own journey, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please like, share, and subscribe if you want to continue this emotional journey with me. And if you've ever struggled with healing or forgiveness, leave a comment. I would love to know how you've moved forward too.